And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson. If you can't tell by the tone of my voice, Andrew and I are not having the best of weeks this week here on the show, as Sunday the Knicks were unfortunately eliminated by the Indiana Pacers in Game 7 of the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Knicks season sadly ends on a sour note. A lot of injuries along the way as well. It did not help the Knicks end that turn, but we'll get a little bit more into their series later on in the show. But, Johnson, I'll leave you with the floor. Any initial thoughts first off with the Knicks or just the NBA playoffs in general?
The way the way Game 7 ended, towards not the way it ended, right? Because I'm obviously, I'm not happy that they lost, et cetera, but what happened for them to get there, right? Especially with Jalen Brunson fracturing his left hand
Yeah.
in the third quarter in Game 7. When he fractured his hand, I was kind of hoping the Knicks would lose. I was kind of hoping put these guys to rest, because you can continue on without Bogdanovich, Mitchell Robinson. Tough, but it's doable. They were chugging along fine without Randall. They could have been better, but they were fine. When you lose Jalen Brunson at this point, on top of every single other injury this team has had, better for them to go to the ER and then Cancun.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very tough end of the season. What was a very good year for this Knicks team. Um, and now a very interesting offseason they'll have to come, they'll have looking forward to. But like I said, we'll break down their series with the Pacers a little bit later on in the show. I think, Johnson, for us, let's start off in the Western Conference and see what happened in the second round of the Western Conference playoffs. And let's start off with that that second round matchup between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks get a huge win over the number one seed Thunder, beating them in 6 games. And Game 6 was a thrilling win for the Mavericks as well, down as many as 20 points in that Game 6, and had to claw their way back into the game. Won very late. They had a 3-point attempt by PJ Washington get called for a foul by an SGA. That led to 3 free throws being had for the Mavericks. They would make 2 out of the 3. Thunder would not be able to get the game-winning shot off at the end. And Dallas takes this series in 6 games, and they are going to their second Western Conference Finals appearance in now the last 3 years. So, job well done by Jason Kidd and his staff, overcoming the Thunder in this second round matchup. And for the Thunder, I think you and I maybe could both agree. Maybe I'm not sure how your stance is on the Thunder, but very young team, and I'm sure they're going to be right back into the thick of this method and this playoff format for years to come.
Yeah, I can't say I was really surprised by the ending of the season for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I did have the Dallas Mavericks at 7, so I was 1 game off. I thought they were maybe going to win it on their home court, on the Thunder's home court, excuse me. Like I said, the Thunder are just too young. They weren't ready for the spotlight yet, and you have to really tip your cap to Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving, I believe, is 8-0 or 14-0, something like that in closeout games now.
I think it's 14-0 now.
14-0. I don't know where 8-0 came from. I did correct myself, though. 14-0 in closeout games. That's just a talent you can't buy. If you can have a guy at the end of the day come into a game and be undefeated in closeout games, that means any game he has played in that's been closeout, whether it's do or die, if he's been on the active roster and he's playing, he's won it.
Yeah.
Down 3-1 deficit with Cleveland, no problem. He didn't play, obviously, in Boston a couple of closeout games, but he was injured. He was injured for the Cleveland series where they lost to the Warriors once or twice. But when he is healthy and he is active and he is playing in closeout games, he's undefeated. And you want that in the postseason. Luka, really tough series, but he gets it done. I feel like if the Thunder got it done, you would have seen a lot of criticism turn towards him, because he's no longer the NBA's darling. He's no longer the new kid on the block. That title would probably go to Paolo Banchero and Victor Wembanyama, where Luka's no longer infallible. You could criticize him. He's a veteran in this league now, which is crazy when you think about it. Being 25 years old, so young, or 25 or 26, one or the other.
Yeah.
But to be a 6-year veteran at that age is almost unheard of in the modern NBA.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Juan Soto in the MLB. It's like it feels like he's been in the league for so long, and yet you look at it, he's still younger than guys like Ali Rutschman, who just got called up recently. Like it's kind of like a wild stat to hear when you hear stuff like that. But for Luka and company, this is a series in which they kind of took advantage of the Thunder's mistakes. I think a lot of, you talked about it. They're still a very young team, still getting into the playoff atmosphere. They obviously got through their first round matchup with the Pelicans, and they got through it pretty easily. And you saw in this matchup, their inconsistency really kind of cost them this series. SGA did everything he could as well in this series. Now after the series is over, you're hearing rumors maybe Josh Giddey gets traded in the offseason. So we'll have to see what they do with that in that regard. But for Dallas, and there's an aspect of things, it really came down to how they played overall in the series. You mentioned Kyrie Irving, monster series for him as well. Luka Doncic had his moments, but did play in most of the series injured as well. So that was another reason why maybe he kind of looked like he was struggling at points in time. PJ Washington, I thought, was the X factor, I think, of the entire series because of how he played offensively. There were games where if Luka wasn't going off, they needed someone else, and they didn't even have to go to Kyrie. It would be PJ Washington getting a playoff career high for him, 31 points at one point. And the rest of the team for Dallas wise, their bench I think was just really outperformed the Thunder. In which when we previewed it, I thought the Thunder's bench would be the X factor for the series, but evidently it was the Dallas bench that played a factor into this one. And all last season, remember that was the biggest thing for Dallas as well. Talking about in regards to their defense. That's why they didn't make the playoffs. They couldn't play defense inside the paint, and that was a huge reason why they couldn't get anything going their way. And, they added guys like Derek Lively in the offseason, Daniel Gafford as well. Got, big, inside defensemen that could get some blocks, key rebounds if Doncic can't get it. And they also had a really good series as well for Dallas in this one, really providing them some good second chance opportunities as well, getting some key blocks in key situations for them to win these games. And now Dallas moves on to the Western Conference Finals, and a shot now, if they can get past their opponent in the Western Conference Finals, which I won't spoil it just yet. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But if they can get past them, they'll go to the NBA Finals, I think, for the first time since they won the championship.
That would be correct. It would be a decade plus in the making for Dallas.
Yeah.
And this other team, the team spoiler in the I guess I won't spoil it. We'll go in. I was gonna say something. I won't spoil it.
Have they made the NBA final? I don't.
Well, if I say that, then I give away the other team,
well,
which
we're gonna talk about
made the finals.
We're gonna talk about it now. We'll go now into that.
So obviously,
series, but
if they do make it, they're gonna make it over a team that's never made the NBA finals. Their peak was with Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves. And by the way, I'm talking about,
right.
That the Game 7 upset has happened, being down over 20 points in the third quarter. What happened for Denver?
Oh, I think it's a mix of things in that series for them. If you look, I think
one thing before we start complimenting anything, I didn't want to say the one thing that we know definitely was Anthony Edwards. Now I know I've been really pro Anthony Edwards. I've said he's the closest thing we have to rookie Michael Jordan in this league, a young Michael Jordan in this league, a 22-year-old Michael Jordan. He was not at this game. In a closeout do-or-die game on the road, 6 of 24 from the field.
But I think that's the beauty of this Timberwolves roster is that they got away with Anthony Edwards having a bad game, and they took advantage of it.
Which is why he escapes criticism.
But right. Go ahead.
He escapes criticism because now all that criticism was on Jokic, where Jokic had 35 points, 19 rebounds, and 7 assists.
Yeah, Jokic.
Him and Jamal Murray, that was pretty much it. And everyone else decided to shoot a combined 28% from the field.
Well, if you look at what Minnesota did the entire season, even going into the regular season and in this playoff series, their biggest thing for them has been their team defense. And they held the Nuggets a lot of times in this series to under 100 points. I think they averaged around 90-something points per game in the overall series with the Timberwolves. And that was a big factor into why Minnesota was able to take advantage. You look at what happened in game number 6. I mean, one of the biggest blowouts you've seen in playoff history, a 45-point loss. I mean, that kind of demoralized Denver, and you thought maybe that would spark them to win Game 7. And in the first half, that definitely looked to be the case. Edwards was struggling. It was a big I think it was a 13-point lead at halftime. You correct me if I'm wrong.
15 points.
15 points. So yeah, so just a couple points off. But at one point, it was a 20-point game in that second quarter. So Denver, it looked like had everything going their way, and the second half, it just really poor performance from the Nuggets. They scored 14 points in the third quarter, which allowed Minnesota to get right back into the game. They would then outscore Denver in the fourth quarter by 9. And you gotta tip your tip of the cap to the Timberwolves team itself. I think one of the biggest reasons why they won Jaden McDaniels, I don't think really gets talked about enough. And you hear guys like Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, mention a kid like this, a guy that's really known for his defense was a huge asset for their offense in this series in both game number 6 and in this game number 7. He shot 7 of 10 from the field, 3 of 4 from the 3-point line, and added 23 points, tied with Cat for the team's leading scorer in this game. And I even mentioned it. I said, if Denver's going to have a chance to win this series, they need a big game out of Jamal Murray. They got that in game 7, but they had no other, production outside of him and Jokic. After that, they had no other scorer reach double figures. It was a rough game for Michael Porter Jr., a rough game for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Aaron Gordon didn't really do much offensively as well. And that's how the Nuggets season ended. And it's now the 6th straight season that the defending NBA champion will not reach past the second round of the NBA playoffs. So that trend is being very, very cautious for whomever may win the championship this year.
Yeah, it's a continuing trend for these teams. And where does Denver go from here now? Because obviously Jamal Murray is a really great closer. Jokic is a talent like we've never seen before. But what do we do with the rest of the team? You have Aaron Gordon there, which did his best Tobias Harris impersonation in this
See,
game.
I think that's Michael Porter.
See, here's the thing. Michael Porter took shots, though. He just was really bad. He took 13 shots on the game, so he never lost his confidence.
Yeah, okay.
Where Aaron Gordon was kind of like a traffic cone.
Yeah, I think when you look at Denver, Aaron Gordon's not going to shoot as much. That's why I think he gets away with it.
Yeah, but 2 of 5 from the field, you got to try.
I'm not disagreeing. I mean, there were points in the series where he was taking a good amount of shots, but the last 2 games he took a combined 12 shots. So
yeah, listen, he's a guy that for the series almost 60% from the field, 40% from downtown, 82% from the line, 14 and 7 tonight. So you're kind of relying on him to kind of be that guy. He had multiple 20-point games this postseason, especially against Minnesota. He had 27 points on 11 of 12 shooting at Minnesota a week ago.
Yeah,
and then and then the last game of the season, this is what he did.
I think for Denver, it's all about improving their bench because they only played 8 guys in this game.
Christian Brown's gonna get better.
No, I like Christian Brown.
I think he's a great player.
I think he's a solid
Justin
player.
Holiday's kind of at the end of his career. Reggie Jackson played 5 minutes. He's at the end of his career. They need another guy.
They need more depth on that bench because
it's Christian Brown.
Jokic and Murray can only do so much for your team. They kind of got away with that last season going on to win the championship. But you saw that for this series. They need a guy like if Porter Jr. has a game like this, you need someone to sub him out and be that replacement. That was Brown for the most part, but if you need other production, let's say KCP, you need to get him out of the lineup to provide a spark off the bench. They didn't have that guy in this series. And the Timberwolves, they have plenty of guys off the bench that could do that. Naz Reid, the reigning 6th man of the year, is another big asset for the Timberwolves team. They're a very well, deep team that is a very scary team that might win the championship this season. I didn't give them credit when we originally, talked about our NBA playoff prediction, but Chris Finch and company have done a great job overall with this team, considering where they were last season and now a 50-plus game win season this year, and now 4 wins away from going to the NBA Finals for the first time in their franchise's history.
That must feel absolutely amazing because this is the most successful Timberwolves team in 20 years, by far.
Yeah.
And there's been people saying for years, oh, your team's going to be scary, they're going to have so much potential, and that's all we heard was potential. We never heard like, oh, this team is doing great in the playoffs. This player is amazing in the playoffs. We didn't say, oh, here they come. It was always, oh, they're going to be really good one day. And
yeah,
they just never got
going back to the years, and not even with Garnett, even go back to the years when they had Kevin Love. You were like, oh, they've got their franchise cornerstone. They just need to get better.
It could have been him too.
And
Kevin Love was a walk in 2020.
Yeah,
on any given night,
and they just didn't have the team around him. But this is, again, look at this team. Think about all the stuff that they've gone through the past couple of years, like the past decade or whatever. They had to get they had to get Karl Anthony Towns to make their team better. Then they got Ant-Man to replace them. And then they even got Rudy Gobert to help their defense. And At times in the series, he definitely got beat down by Jokic, but is still the reigning defensive player of the year. So it's good to have him on this roster with a guy like Jaden McDaniels as well, who's also a really good defender. So this is a very scary Timberwolves team. And if I'm one of the two Eastern Conference teams, I think you're hoping, no discredit to Dallas, but I think you're hoping that you would face Dallas in the NBA Finals if you were to get past your opponent in the East Finals.
It's so tough.
Dallas is a good team. Like I said, I'm not discrediting anything they do. I'm just looking
I think
at
I'd rather face Minnesota over Dallas, and that's just
really.
not my. But listen, I said they would beat OKC if OKC looked like this unstoppable monster during the majority of the season. I would want to face Minnesota. Like I said, nothing against these guys, but I know they have veteran leadership in Mike Conley, but Cat's never been there before.
I think that's the
He does
reason
not.
why I
He
want.
does not know what it's like to play there.
Yeah, I think that's a big reason why I want Minnesota also to succeed. I've always liked Mike Conley as a player, and he got
One of
some
the
bad
classiest guys in the league,
and he got
by
so many
far.
bad breaks with Memphis and stuff. And it's like I want to see him win a championship once, and this is by far going to be his best opportunity to do so. Minnesota is obviously going to go into the series as the favorite to beat Dallas, but this is a very close series between these two teams. I don't think there's much discrepancy, and you know I think this is they're two very even teams. I think Dallas, as I mentioned, they've gotten better defensively over the season and comparing what they were last year. And you could say the same thing about the Timberwolves because they kind of struggled last season in guarding some of these top tier teams. And now look what they just did to Denver, the defending NBA champions. They held them to 90 points in a game 7, and now they're moving on to the West Finals to take on Dallas.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the NBA seasons where 3 out of the 4 teams in the conference finals, I wouldn't mind winning the ring. Obviously, you have some salt against the Pacers and the Celtics, but
Yeah, I
if
think you and I are both in agreement that we want. I think a lot of
I
people
want the
might be in
West to
agreement.
win.
I think a lot of people want the Western Conference to win.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe again, New Yorkers will have the bias against the Pacers because of what happened. I think if not for that, then I don't think they would mind the Pacers winning the series.
yeah,
But
no, I'm cheering for Boston this
yeah,
series
I think
because
the
I
Celtics
know
are
the New York
very,
Boston
very,
thing
very
is
much
real,
there.
but like in NBA terms, New York Boston's pretty much never been relevant, other than a
Yeah,
couple of games a year in our own division.
yeah.
Especially the NBA when you play a team like the Pacers 3 times a year anyway. So what? You play them one less time a year, and you have the history of them in the
No,
'90s, the
the Knicks and Pacers
2000s.
have more playoff history
It's
than the Celtics
way,
do.
way, way more beef. And that's not just me being sour about it. It's just that they haven't played a fully healthy team.
No,
They played a banged up Milwaukee, or they played a New York where they pretty much had guys with IVs in their arms out there.
and you
They
can make
literally
the
had
case
OG
without
Anunoby out there
you
who
make the
couldn't
case
even
without
walk down the court.
Porzingis. That's another key asset for Boston that they're going to miss in that series.
Yeah, but
At least for the
missing
first 2 games.
Porzingis and missing your starting
No,
five is a completely different thing.
oh no,
Your starting
I'm not
five
disagreeing at
outside
all with that.
Jalen Brunson.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that at
Remember,
all.
Josh
I
Hart
agree
and
with you.
Dante DiVincenzo, as good as they are, they're brought in to play about 25 minutes a night, not 42. You're missing. Well, I guess let's talk about that Knicks series now, right? Since we're talking
Well,
about it already.
let's go into Boston first quickly. I think we can do a quick, recap of the Celtics series because I know we'll go into a lot of detail with the Knicks series itself. For Boston, they beat the Cavaliers in 5 games. They took advantage of a lot of injuries as well for Cleveland. They didn't have Donovan Mitchell, I believe, for the final 2 games of this series. And the Celtics now are moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals once again, 4 wins away from moving on to the NBA Finals. And like I mentioned, they won't have Porzingis at least for the first 2 games of the Eastern Conference Finals. But on the other flip side of things for Cleveland now, I'm curious what you think they do from here on because there's been rumors maybe JB Bickerstaff gets fired. Donovan Mitchell has been rumored in trade talks. Even Jared Allen has been rumored in trade talks as well. What do you think Cleveland does now going from here?
Well, that's an interesting question because Cleveland is going to be bogged down by Darius Garland's contract if he does not perform. I said that he was like 20
Yeah,
or
Garland had a
2010.
very bad game 5.
I mean, it's just kind of crazy because how bad he's been.
So
It's just so if you're gonna be paying him all that money, you kind of have to commit to win now.
the thing is for them is that let's say they fire Bickerstaff. Who is the best available coach they could even hire?
I feel like the NBA has a rotation of about 5 coaches that just keep on getting fired and
Because
rehired.
right, because
Doc Rivers, Mike Budenholzer, Frank Vogel, all these guys that just get
right.
fired and rehired. I don't know where you go.
that's the problem because look at the Lakers. Look at the people that they're interviewing for their job. That's why I'm saying if that's who the Lakers are going after, and again, no discredit to those guys, but it's just the point of being is like they're not really going for a top tier head coach name. If that's the case, then what is Cleveland? What can Cleveland do at that aspect? Because
I,
I don't think
I don't know who they hire.
I don't know Bickerstaff's not a bad coach per se, but it just feels like Cleveland is not going to do much better than being a 4 or 5 seed in the East. Because at least when you looked at the rest of the Eastern Conference as a whole, you see the rest of this conference, they're getting better and better by each year. Cleveland's just kind of in the middle of the pack where the team is kind of set, and it might be because of what you mentioned, the Garland contract. You have Donovan Mitchell is going to be, his contracts right now. Jared Allen also has a big deal. They don't really have a lot of, cap room and stuff to wheel and deal and try to improve this roster as a whole, which could lead to an interesting offseason because they might be sellers in this offseason. And maybe Donovan Mitchell is that guy that gets traded in this offseason. So I think that's something you and I will probably have to monitor on. I know, obviously, I'm not talking about the Knicks per se. I'm just meaning that that's a guy that's going to be the top trade target, it looks like, in this upcoming offseason if he were to get dealt by Cleveland. But I think now, with that series being done, Johnson, now we can go in to this Pacers and Knicks series because this one was a bunch of highs and a bunch of lows for us, at least for the Knicks, because obviously going into it, you didn't have Mitchell Robinson. He was done after he got injured in the Philadelphia series. They didn't have Bogdanovich, who got injured as well in the Philadelphia series. So you already lost two key components to your team going in to this matchup with the Pacers. Game one led to a lot of controversy with the whole kickball violation. Didn't really, you know, at the end of the day, the Knicks were still able to take advantage and take the win. I don't care what people say about it. It happened. We got over it. The Pacers obviously are not thinking about that anymore. Game two, you and I were both at that game. A thrilling win for the Knicks in which they were down 10 at halftime. They lost Jalen Brunson to an injury. And we weren't certain if he was going to come back to play in that game. They had a monster first half from OG Anunoby. And then Brunson comes out of the locker room on the 50, I think it was 54-year anniversary of when Willis Reed came out of the tunnel for Game 7 of the NBA Finals against the Lakers. Kind of like a similar moment in that aspect. Brunson comes out of the tunnel. He starts taking warm-up shots in the second half. He plays the second half and leads the Knicks to a thrilling come from behind win to take the 2-0 series lead. Then Game 3 happens. They didn't have Anunoby in that game after he got injured in the second half with a hamstring injury. So they go into that game three. It's a back and forth game. The Knicks at one point were up 9 with, I think, about 6 minutes left in the game. They were not able to close it out. Nembhard hits the three with 20 seconds left, and the Pacers take the game. Game four was all Indiana, and that one really can't really say much more about that. They just dominated the Knicks, and the game was pretty much over by halftime. Game five, the Knicks kind of reversed the roles. They would take advantage of the Pacers' mistakes, and they routed the Indiana Pacers to take a 3-2 lead. Then in game six, it was a game in which the Knicks started off very slow. Brunson didn't have the best shooting performance in the first half, had a better second half, but by the time they started to make their shots in that second half, it was already a little too late. And Indiana tied the series going into game seven. And that game six, they lost Josh Hart to an injury. So the status of Hart and Anunoby going into game seven was a question mark, but they both made it a mission to make sure that they would play in that game seven. But you could tell from the get go in that game that Anunoby, at least for Anunoby, he was not healthy and he could not run. He made his first 2 shots of the game, but you could see he was just doing like a mild jog on the court and could not really run. And that was letting the Pacers take advantage of some early shots and making them in that game. And Anunoby sat for the rest of the game, did not play, and the rest of the first half and the entire second half was taken out after the first 5 minutes. So once again, they didn't have Anunoby in that game, which really hurts. And we would love to have had him at full speed and full health, but with that hamstring injury, it's just really tough to get back from an injury like that, especially in the NBA aspect. Then you have Hart's abdominal strain, which really affects his rebounding ability as well. And then you look at what the Pacers did in that game seven as well. A unbelievable shooting performance from them in the first and second half of the game in general. I think they shot about 68 to 69% for the game. I think I don't remember what the exact percentage was for the first half. It might have been near 70% um, for that first half. They just shot the lights out in that game, and they proved why they are a very good team when it comes to scoring ability. They were behind just the Celtics in scoring for the NBA this season, and they proved it in this game seven, scoring 130 points, taking the game seven at the Garden, and now they move on to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they'll take on those Boston Celtics for a trip to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, you kind of summed it up perfectly. They really don't have to add much more here. I said this was going to be a
It just
hard
sucks.
7 game series, and it sucks the way it ended
Yeah,
because the one thing I think you did leave out, which I will bring up because I'm salty about it, is this game 3 on the road was tied up 106-106, and Nemhard just kind of hits a miracle shot. The guy was made
yeah,
one
no,
field goal in like 40 minutes.
I brought that up. Unfortunately,
Okay,
it was a
I
lot to
blocked that
it was a
out
lot to
again.
take
Then
in. It was a lot to
yeah,
take in, but
this should have been a 5 game series win for New York, a gentleman's sweep.
yeah, that if
Um,
Anunoby doesn't get hurt in game two, I think you could make that case.
I'm not
That's
even saying if Anunoby gets hurt. I'm saying probably if Josh Hart doesn't get hurt
mm,
because they were winning games without Anunoby. Game 3 was evidence of that they should have won that game. They came back and they won in New York by a large margin.
yeah, game five, right?
So if they had just not hit that shot in Game 3, this is a 5 game win, a series win for New York, and Jalen Brunson probably doesn't break his hand. Josh Hart doesn't get hurt. But it is what it is. You can only use crying over spilt milk, and
Yeah,
I just hope we have a
it's
healthy Boston team in this finals,
it
this
it
conference finals.
it comes down to it's the business nature of sports. Injuries are going to happen. It happens
Yeah,
every time for
injuries
teams.
happen every game, but
Not for a
when's the
whole
last
team.
time?
No, I know.
The last time you probably saw injuries of this magnitude, where pretty much the entire team got hurt, isn't really in the modern era. You could argue, oh yeah, KD Clay went down. That's great. That's 2
Yeah,
guys.
I think
Imagine if all the Golden State role players went down. If you're man, this is going back. If your Jordan Bell got injured, if your Mo Spates got injured,
no. That's a name I did
that
not.
they were
I did
getting
not.
20, 25
No,
minutes. Like
I
if
know.
your
I just
Sean
didn't.
Livingston got hurt,
I didn't expect to
and
hear
then you
that
really
name.
and then you start. I can't remember who was on the 10th or 11th man on those teams.
I couldn't even
It's
tell
just
you.
so hard to remember.
You talking about the year they lost to Toronto, right?
Yeah,
I
that
couldn't
was the
even
year
tell you.
KD and Clay went down. So if you had Steph, you still had Steph and Draymond, right?
Yeah,
So, right, okay, you have Jalen Brunson, he's your Steph Curry, and then
probably
Josh
had.
Hart is your Draymond Green, and then you lose your. It's just that I get injuries are part of a game, but injuries to a certain extent, right? You have a player that tears his ACL, right? You don't have 8 players with injury. You don't have your entire starting 5 get
Yeah,
injured in one playoff run. That's just unheard of.
I've seen this like a bunch of times with even Yankee teams where they'll have like a bunch of their guys like at least during the regular season. Like this doesn't happen in the postseason as often, but they will have like all their top talent get injured, and you're looking at you know guys that were just picked up off of waivers or guys that were just in Double A week ago, and now they're on the major league roster because you've lost so many guys to injuries, and you're trying to at least weather the storm and make sure that you can get past that point in the season. And that's easier said than done when you're doing it in the regular season. But when you're doing it in the postseason, where every game is like at least, 2 or 3 days after the game you just played, there's not much time to really rest and make sure you get ready. That's why for Anunoby and Hart, they only had 2 days. I mean, maybe not for Anunoby, but for Hart, he only had a day and not even to rest before and try to potentially play game seven. Anunoby, you knew realistically was not going to be able to be fully healthy for that game seven. When you look at how he got hurt in that game to win, that's a tough injury. It's a hamstring, and you're not really going to be able to run when you come down on your knee like that, and it kind of like buckles in a way. Thankfully, nothing to a worse extent, but it just doesn't really help your basketball ability when you have that hamstring injury. And Obi really couldn't do much defensively. I'm shocked
Yeah,
he even made 2 shots in the game.
here's the thing: you don't need your hamstring to shoot the basketball. You just need everything else
No, I
in the
know. I'm
game of
just
basketball. You need to defend, the rebound,
right,
run up and down the court.
and
So
he
for
couldn't do any, unfortunately.
so yeah, he could still listen. If you want to put him there in the corner and he plays no defense, he'll make those shots 60-70% of the time. But
Right.
when it
I
comes to actually playing defense, or if you have things that actually are
I
required in
think
basketball, that's no go.
I think the only thing left to ponder on for us as a fan is what do they do next? I think they should run it back with the team, but maybe add like one or two more players.
Yeah, I don't think you need a superstar,
I don't think so either.
especially not right now. This team definitely doesn't need it. You're gonna
I
add an
think
All NBA guy back to the team, Randall. People say, "Oh yeah, Randall's a marginal upgrade." I don't know what marginal means.
I
He's
think
a
you run it
multi-time
back.
All NBA player. He's a multi-time
Yeah, he's still a good
NBA All
player.
Star. You could say, "Oh, we don't need Randall's this and blah blah blah." At the end of the day, he's still an undisputed top 30 player. At
No,
worst, he is top 30. That is what we're accepting. And when you add a top 30 player to this roster as currently
you got
constructed,
guys like Kevin Garnett vouching for him.
yeah, of course, of course, because they know how. Because he kind of knows how tough Randall is. Because remember back in his Laker days, when he was a rookie, he went against Kevin Garnett. He had an incident with him,
Yeah,
and Kobe Bryant really gave him accolades, saying, "Hey, that's how Julius Randle responded. That's how he would have responded to that." So, uh, he has guys in the league vouching for him that are known great players, Hall of Famers, and you're gonna sit here and say they don't know talent. I highly disagree with that.
I think you run it back this year, see how a year goes. And then if it doesn't work next season, then you consider it. But I'm still of the notion where this is a good roster. I think the biggest concern for this off season is you got to bring back Hardenstein because he's a free agent, and you got to bring back Anunoby who's also a free agent. Those are two of the biggest free agents they'll have upcoming this off season. Maybe they bring back Alec Burks. I'm not sure what they do with him yet. He had a great postseason run after not really playing the first two, maybe even three games of the series. And I think those are the biggest three you have to look forward to in terms of resigning back. And then I think for addition wise, just in my opinion, maybe add a point guard, maybe get one more center because just in case Mitch gets hurt again, because unfortunately that's been a common trend with him. He has not been able to get the better of luck when it comes to injuries, and this one isn't even really realistically his own fault. Um, but I think just adding one or two more guys for depth purposes would help this team so much because you don't have to force some of your players to play all 40 minutes. Now, I'm not saying that's on Tibbs to play them that many minutes. It's just you trust those guys a lot more in that time of the point than maybe subbing in someone and then, maybe they have a great game, but you're also risking the fact that maybe they struggle and it costs your team some points at the end of the day when it comes to defensive purposes. So I don't really, I agree with you. I don't think they need to add a superstar. I think just add one or two more good role players for your bench. And I think this team is still very good enough to be a top tier team in the Eastern Conference again next season.
Yeah, you talk about players. A lot of people say, "Oh, we need point guard." I have a lot of faith in Deuce McBride.
The only reason it's not that I don't have faith in him. I view him more as a shooting guard for us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, listen, he
Because I
has
feel like he shoots
quickly was the exact same way, man. Then that fourth year, he took the
right,
passing leap. And
right.
if Tibbs has developed a small guard from a Power Five school before, he's done it multiple times. I have faith that he will be able to make that leap and even be a marginal playmaker off the bench. Because if that is the case, then I think we're good to go.
Do you think they need a veteran type like role players for this bench, or do you think like they could still
They
get
have
away with
veteran
like
role
some youth
players
players?
because those veteran role players are Dante DiVincenzo, it's Josh Hart, it's going to be either Mitchell Robinson or Isaiah Hartenstein as the roster is currently constructed. So you have those veteran role players already. It's not,
Well,
but we don't have
yeah.
to act like these guys are rookies or sophomores.
No, yeah, no,
Mitchell Robinson's
yeah,
been in the league since 2018 at this point.
yeah. And he's I
He's
don't
the
think
longest tenured Nick on the roster.
and he doesn't feel like he's old either. I feel like he's like
Yeah,
26,
he is
27.
young. He is 26 years old, but he's
Yeah.
been on the an NBA roster since 2018. So this
Yeah,
is going to be his seventh year in the league.
I think the the biggest thing is the Knicks should not panic at how this end season ended and look at the fact of you won 50 games, you got to this 2 seed, and you were one away from the Eastern Conference Finals. You don't really need to tamper with this team and go all out to try to make sure you get there next season. You have reports of Brunson now wanting to take an extension and come back, and he'll take it even on a lower type of deal, which will help bolster the roster up, which is huge for this team as well. Those are the type of players that you want to have in your team build around, where you have those team players that will take lower, salary and make sure that the roster gets better around you. That way you can get to the NBA Finals and win a championship for a Knicks team that hasn't won it in 50 plus years. So we'll have to see what they do
If
in the
that is the
offseason.
case, and if he does leave $121 million on the table, that would be almost unheard of. I would have
Listen,
never heard. It's
those are
unprecedented. That is the Tom Brady method to building a team.
those are great
When you
players
know
do
you're a
that,
superstar and you take, yeah, great players
right?
do that, but how many great players have done that?
But that's what I'm saying.
So it's
Those are the type
unprecedented.
of players you love to see in terms of they're willing to make sure that the team can win a championship as long like they don't really care about the money at this point. And which is funny because that's all pretty much it is now in the world, especially in the NBA. But Brunson wants to win. He's that type of player. He wants to win a championship. You heard it in his press conference after Game 7 ended. He knows the season wasn't a success because they didn't get to the NBA Finals. They didn't even get to the Eastern Conference Finals. They need to make sure they get there next season because they don't want this run to be a massive failure. They want to make sure that this ends in glory and finally ends the negative aspect of what Knicks fans have been dealing with for decades and decades since the 1970s. So they want to get this done, and I don't feel like they're too far off from getting it done. They really just need to add maybe a couple more pieces, and they have that team that's ready to potentially win a championship.
Well,
But
that being said, I think we're ready for the next part of our
well,
show, and
some
that's the
NBA
mushing hour.
news. Yeah. Well, let's get into some NBA news before we go to the mushy hour real quick. Because remember, the last time we recorded an NBA episode, it was about 2 weeks ago. So some stuff has happened since that 2 week span. We've mentioned earlier Frank Vogel is in the cycle of getting hired and fired. Well, he was fired by the Phoenix Suns as their head coach. So Mike Budenholzer, the former Milwaukee Bucks head coach, now named the new head coach of the Phoenix Suns. We'll have to see what they do in the offseason. Obviously, there have been rumors of trades with potentially Devin Booker and Kevin Durant if they do end up trying to move one of them. But Budenholzer is an already proven commodity winning a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks. So he'll now have to try to see if he can lead Phoenix to their first ever NBA championship as well.
Yeah, no,
Um,
Mike Budenholzer is an excellent head coach. He should have never been fired. I can't believe I even have to kind of say this, but I'll never understand it. Right? It's like teams don't want to build a culture nowadays.
yeah,
And maybe one day I'll understand. It's like, oh, this is why they got rid of him, because it seems like, you know, you hire a rookie head coach, he's doing a decent job, and you fire him for Doc Rivers halfway through the season, and your team gets objectively worse in every single statistical category. If you're
yeah,
going to do that, just keep Mike Budenholzer and just, one player's contract, because now you're paying multiple head coaches just to not coach your team, and you have a superstar in his prime, you have an all-star towards the end of his prime, and this is what you're doing.
yeah. Well, I'm curious to see if what Phoenix does with him because I think it's probably the best hire they've had a head coach in probably a long time. And I think this is a very good hire from this team in order to try to maybe even keep guys like Durant and Booker there for a couple more seasons to try to ensure that they maybe win an NBA championship. They were not the only team though that would hire a head coach in the last couple of weeks. We saw the Charlotte Hornets. They hired Boston Celtics assistant Charles Lee as their new head coach. So obviously the Hornets, we know what they have been the past couple of seasons. They have really had some bad luck. Their team is still very young, and they're trying to rebuild it as best as they can. When they have a young emerging star in Lamelo Ball, but they still need to fix the team around them in whole, and they're hoping that maybe a guy from Boston and Charles Lee can lead them into that new foundation to try to get back into the Eastern Conference playoffs. So we'll see. But going back to the Milwaukee Bucks, we saw when Game 6 when they lost to the Indiana Pacers, we saw Patrick Beverly get into an incident with a fan in which he threw a basketball at the fan. Emotions were certainly running high in that game for Milwaukee, and the emotions got the better of Pat Beverly at the end of the day because he'll be suspended for the first 4 games of the NBA season going into next year. So kind of comes against with the territory of Pat Bev when you have him on your team. You know, he's a very hot headed player. Um, he does show a lot of emotion, whether that be good or bad. But in this case, it was a bad time to do what he did in that Game 6, especially in the manner that Milwaukee lost. And now he'll be suspended for the first 4 games of the NBA season next year. So
See, it's so sad because he first got to the league in Houston, he has such humble beginnings. Uh, where he's playing over in Italy, right? He's on a EuroLeague contract. He has to really pay his way to get into the NBA. and he's fallen so. It's not even like he's fallen hard. It's just that it's such a complete change of character from the guy he was 10 years ago. He always had that fire, that spirit, that spirit of being a competitor, but just his actions over the last couple of years, they seem to get more and more extreme every single year. Every single year. His like, oh, your next 5 years of mine to Steph Curry, that was 5 years ago. How were the last 5 years of Pat Bev? And I think he's had some time to kind of reflect on that, and he doesn't like the answer. And here we are now.
Yeah. And then the final news before we go into our mushing hour is we did see the NBA draft lottery take place in the last couple of weeks, and it was probably the most, I would say, maybe tumultuous or surprising way because of how it ended up going. But despite with a 3% chance of winning the lottery odds, the Atlanta Hawks win the NBA lottery and they will pick number one in this upcoming NBA draft this year. And this is a team that just made the play in this past season. So they now get the luxury of getting the number one overall pick. And for the second straight year, Detroit has the worst record in the league, and they will be picking number five this time around in this year's NBA draft. So the tank job was certainly not appreciated by the NBA, and the lottery odds did not go in their favor. And for Atlanta now, for GM Landry Fields, they get an opportunity now to pick number one if they do choose to end up picking number one in this upcoming draft.
I almost feel like it's done on purpose. Does that make any sense?
With the way Detroit's been playing,
I feel like this is
yeah,
a subtle punishment by the league.
yeah, I don't disagree with it because Detroit is not even trying to hide that they were tanking. Remember how they started the season? What was that losing streak they were on to start the year?
I think
Was it 28?
it was almost it didn't break Philadelphia.
I don't remember how many games they
It
lost
was
in a row.
definitely more than it was either 19 or 20 games.
Yeah, they were, like I said, they weren't even trying to hide the fact that they were just horrible to start the season. And they're kind of just in that boat where then it's now they have the fifth overall pick. Again, not a lot of people are a fan of this upcoming draft, but you still like to have the number one overall pick
Oh, of course.
after having a 14 win season.
Listen, because the number one overall pick, like kind of they've said before, maybe Tobias Harris, maybe get the fourth or fifth best starter on the team.
Maybe,
But you still want that if you're Atlanta. If Atlanta could add a decent starter on their team, they would want that.
I've heard rumors that they're thinking about maybe trading Trae Young. They might go with the full reset. So does that maybe play into a factor of what they do?
Could.
Because a team like I'm sure any playoff team would like to have Trae Young on their squad regardless, but I don't know. Atlanta's in a weird spot because you could add
They're
it
an
at
NBA
player,
hell. The Hornets were here for years,
right?
where they're not good enough to be a consistent playoff team, but they're not bad enough to get a high lotto pick. And the year they do get a high lotto pick, it's like getting a mid tier pick.
Yeah,
And for all I know, Alex Sarr or Nikola Topic, whoever goes number one overall, I'm not really sure yet because it's kind of up in the air.
yeah,
They could be a great player, but we just don't know that right now.
yeah. So I'm very curious to see what Atlanta does in the next couple of weeks with the draft. When is the draft in June? End of
It's in
June?
June. It's at the end of the season, at the end of the playoffs.
Right. Okay. So not much time to. They got some time. I guess about a month away from decide what they do, but curious to see what they do. But now, Johnson, let's go into our favorite time of the show, and that does indeed be the mushing hour. We have 4 teams left in the NBA playoffs. The conference finals will be taking place this week, and I think we'll start off in the Eastern Conference because you and I are both of the same factor. I think we don't want Indiana to win as much as I hate to say I want a Boston team to win a series because the salt is still very much there, folks. It's going to be like this probably until next season happens. But we do have the Pacers and the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, two of the top scoring teams in all of the NBA this season in terms of points per game. And they now meet in the East Finals. Boston is certainly going to be a heavy favorite in this series as they've been for most of this NBA playoffs. So Johnson, I'm certain you're going with Boston in the series, but how many games do you think it will
Boston
get
in
taken
4. I'm
for?
not even giving them a game this time. I've given every team the benefit of the doubt against Boston. Say, oh, maybe Boston in 6, and they've won in 5. These are two inferior teams. This is an inferior team to the two teams they've played before them. Give me Boston in 4.
Now, I've been doing good for Boston so far. I picked both of their series correct so far. Both 5 game series where they took out in round one. And I'm trying to remember who they took out of round one now because I completely forget. They took out Miami. It took me a second. And then they obviously just beat the Cavaliers. I think they're going to struggle a little bit in this series because I don't feel like they're going to be. Yes, they're like obviously the better team on paper, but from what I saw from Indiana in this previous series with the Knicks, I feel like they're going to score a good amount of points still. And I think also not having for Porzingis in the first 2 games will not help Boston.
If they struggle against this roster, you have to question everything about Jason Tatum.
But again, that's been the case for the Celtics for the past couple of years. They should have had a championship by now, and they haven't got it done because of others, because of things not going their way and them just not capitalizing in the heat of the moment. And no pun intended, but they've lost to teams like the Heat, and then they obviously had that finals loss to the Warriors a couple of years ago. They just cannot get the job done. Now, does that mean I'm picking Indiana for this series? No. I have the Celtics winning, but I have them winning in 6. I think Indiana will get 2 on them, but I just don't think Boston is going to take Indiana as serious. And I think that's where the Pacers can take advantage of that because they have how they score and a team overlooking them and thinking, oh, all we got to do is just get past this Indianapolis team and we're going right into the NBA Finals where we're expected to win. I don't think that's necessarily the case in this one, but I think Boston will struggle, but I think they still get the job done and they hold on in 6 games to move on to the NBA Finals once again. Now, the series that I think a lot of people are looking forward to, obviously, is the Western Conference Finals, that being placed between the Dallas Mavericks and the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is a very close and even series, Johnson. Who do you have winning this one?
Dallas in 7.
You have Dallas in 7. Okay.
I've had Dallas. Pretty much, I said it was a coin flip between them and the Clippers. I felt like they were going to beat the OKC Thunder, and here we are now. Give me Dallas in 7. It's just I don't think Anthony Edwards is ready. That's what it boils down to.
So this is interesting, folks, because this is going to be the 3rd straight series that Johnson has picked against the Timberwolves. So if you're a T-Wolves fan, maybe that's a good thing for you. Maybe.
I mean, sure, I picked against Minnesota, but I also picked against OKC.
No,
It's not
no,
like
you did.
it's not like you bat 1,000.
No, I know, obviously. I've only batted 1,000 in Boston series, and it's just funny enough. But I said it in the West in the last preview with the Nuggets and Timberwolves. I said whoever wins this series is going to go to the NBA Finals, and I'm sticking to my gut with that one. I'm going to take the Timberwolves in 7 as well. I think this does go to 7 games because I just think they're so evenly matched. There's going to be a game or two where you see some inconsistencies and the teams don't shoot as well, whether it be Minnesota or Dallas, and that will be the advantage of the other team winning the series. I think the only reason I like Minnesota a little bit more is, I think Rudy Gobert will be a big factor for this one because, you don't have a big top tier player in the paint for Dallas that will match up with Gobert in terms of them offensive wise. I mean, you're going from Nikola Jokic to Daniel Gafford slash Derek Lively. And nothing, no disrespect to them, but they're not the MVP of the entire league. So I think it's that. And I think Karl Anthony Towns will be the reason why Minnesota wins this series. I think he's been through so much with the Timberwolves team. He's been through the bad years. Has finally gotten to this point in his career where this team is good enough to potentially be an NBA championship contender. And I think for them, as long as he can stay healthy in this series and the Timberwolves make sure that they keep their defense intensity up as well when facing guys like Kyrie and Luka. And again, have to watch out for PJ Washington considering what he just did in the previous series against OKC. I just think that the Timberwolves defense is going to be too much for Dallas in this one. But it does go to 7 because of how good Luka and Kyrie are. They're going to make sure that this series does go the distance. I just think at the end of the day, in Game 7, Minnesota at home will take it and go to the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. And for me, would get the Kevin Garnett matchup with Boston and Minnesota. So KG would certainly be a fan of that one.
So you're gonna call it the Kevin Garnett Bowl.
I'm going to call it the Kevin Garnett Bowl.
What's a Boston Dallas player I could think of now?
Just a fortunate circumstance for the Nets not being in there.
Unfortunate.
Well, not for me.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course not. But that pretty much wraps it up for the Mushing Hour here. Any final thoughts, Johnson, before we wrap up the show this week?
I'm only gonna watch the Western Conference Finals, so my analysis will be taken strictly from highlights of the Eastern Conference Finals. It probably won't be a lot, but knowing my mushing, it will be a 7-game series that goes to Indiana now. So who knows?
Yeah, you know what? I'm at the point where I'm not going to discredit anything Indiana does. I'm just going to have to take them as a potential threat, but I still have Boston winning the series. My final thoughts for this: go Rangers, because now they're the only thing I have left in terms of playoff format. They're in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Florida
Panthers. On Friday.
Well, no, Game 1's on Wednesday.
Oh, Game 1's on Wednesday. Game 2 is on Friday.
Nope, Game 1 is tomorrow. So
I thought that was on Friday was Game 1. Apparently, Game 2 is Friday.
Yeah, Game 2 is Friday. Yep, I'm going to be a nervous wreck this upcoming week. But keep in mind, Game 1 of the NBA playoffs is, as of this recording, tonight between the Pacers and Celtics. I thought that was maybe Wednesday, but that's not the case.
That is tonight. That's in about 40 minutes.
That is about 40 minutes. So maybe I watch that, but I probably don't, because I'm still very salty from what happened in the second round of the playoffs. But I think overall, this has been a very fun and exciting NBA playoffs, and we still have 4 teams left. Who will be the final 2 teams to get out of the conference playoffs? We'll have to tune in and find out these next couple of days and see who gets to the NBA Finals to compete for the Larry O'Brien Trophy. But that is going to do it for this week's edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Down from 8-4 now in the NBA playoffs. We'll have to see who comes out of the conference finals between Boston and Indiana and Dallas and Minnesota to get closer to that NBA championship and edging their name and legacy for this upcoming, or for, I should say not upcoming, but for this past season in the NBA. This has been Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson with the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your week.